Anti-IRGC protests explode in Iran. Trump declares war is back. Two fronts, one regime, no warning, no way out. What happens in the next 24 hours could change everything. Welcome back, my friends, to Global Arc Institute. If you are joining us for the first time, let me say this clearly. This channel is built for people like you. People who want the truth about what is happening in our world without the noise, without the shouting. Now, before we go any further, I want to ask you for something. Not much, just a small favor. If you find value in what we do here, please take a moment and press that subscribe button. It costs you nothing, but it means everything to us, and it helps more people find the truth as well. And one more thing, if you don't mind. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Which city, which country? We would love to know who is with us tonight. Now, let's get into it. Iran is now facing two enemies at the same time. On one side, the United States military continues its strikes against Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps positions across the country. On the other side, the Iranian people themselves have taken to the streets, defying repeated warnings from their own government to stay home. Officials, including the country's supreme leadership circle, had urged citizens not to protest. The message was simple. This is not the time to march. But the warning was ignored. Anger over daily suffering has grown too strong to be contained by fear alone. What makes this moment significant is the pattern. Analysts tracking the unrest have noted clear similarities to a previous wave of protests that began in late December of last year. That earlier uprising also started small, in scattered groups, in different neighborhoods and cities. Within days, it spread. The same signs are now appearing again, small gatherings turning into coordinated marches, local frustration turning into a nationwide movement. While the streets fill with demonstrators, the military side of the crisis has also entered a new and formal phase. President Donald Trump has sent an official letter to the United States Congress. The letter notifies lawmakers that military operations against Iran have resumed. This is not a minor announcement. Under U.S. law, a president must inform Congress within a specific window of time after ordering new strikes, and this notification satisfies that requirement. The timing matters. Several members of Congress had attempted to block further military action through formal votes. Despite these efforts, the notification has already been delivered, and the process cannot be undone through those same channels. In practical terms, this means the military campaign will continue, regardless of political opposition inside Washington. For ordinary Iranians, the two crises are impossible to separate. The war has not caused their economic hardship, but it has made it worse. Hospitals are struggling, public sector wages remain unpaid, families report being unable to withdraw their own savings from local banks. These pressures were building long before the current round of strikes began, but the conflict has removed any political space for the government to address them. Security forces have responded to the protests with a measured approach so far. Reports from multiple cities describe the use of batons and tear gas rather than the deployment of the Revolutionary Guard's specialized units. Those units remain on standby, watching, but not yet engaged directly with the crowds. Analysts suggest this restraint is deliberate. The regime cannot afford to fight a war on two fronts using its most capable forces, so ground-level control of the protests has been left largely to standard police and basic security checkpoints. This creates an unusual moment of vulnerability for the government. In the previous uprising, the pattern was consistent. Authorities would tolerate protests for a day, sometimes two. Then, once the crowds refused to disperse, the response would escalate sharply. Whether that same escalation is coming again remains uncertain, but the conditions that led to it before are now visibly present. Meanwhile, the American military notification changes the strategic picture in a different way. It confirms that Washington views the current strikes not as a limited, one-time action, but as a sustained campaign. Officials close to the decision have indicated that further operations are expected in the immediate days ahead, targeting Revolutionary Guard positions across multiple regions of the country. Taken together, these two developments, a formal declaration that war has resumed and a protest movement growing in real time on the ground, point to a government under pressure from directions it cannot fully control. It faces an external military force with far greater firepower, and an internal population that has run out of patience. The events of the coming days will likely determine how this two-front crisis develops. Whether the protests grow into something larger, or whether they are contained through force, will depend heavily on how distracted and stretched the regime's security apparatus becomes by the ongoing military campaign. For now, both fronts are active, both are escalating, and neither shows any sign of slowing down. Behind every protest sign and every chant heard on the streets of Iran, there is a number, a price, a bill that cannot be paid. While the world watches the military conflict unfold, the real story driving people into the streets is far more personal and far more painful. The Iranian economy has been collapsing for years, but the situation has now reached a breaking point. Inflation inside the country has climbed to roughly 300%. To put that in perspective, in most Western nations, a rise in inflation from 2% to 5% is treated as a serious economic emergency. In Iran, prices have risen by 300%, and ordinary people are the ones absorbing that shock every single day. One case that has circulated widely among protesters involves the cost of a specific medical treatment. Citizens report that a medicine which once cost around 100,000 in local currency now costs approximately 32 million. That is not a typo, and it is not an exaggeration. It is simply what has happened to prices inside the country as the currency has weakened and shortages have grown worse. This kind of economic pain touches nearly every group inside Iranian society. Nurses and doctors, some of the lowest paid professionals in the country, have not received their salaries in months. In the city of Yazd, healthcare workers have begun protesting inside hospitals themselves, a rare and risky move, since hospital staff can be easily identified and targeted afterward. Their message is simple. They are not even asking for a pay increase. They are asking to be paid at all for the work they have already done. Retirees and pensioners have joined the movement as well. Many of them worked for decades in state industries, including telecommunications, and now find themselves without the payments they were promised. In several cities, protesters have chanted that their pockets are empty, and that they would rather die than continue living in humiliation. That particular phrase has become a recurring chant across multiple demonstrations, echoing similar language used during the uprising of December last year. Banking troubles have added another layer of anger. Numerous citizens report going to withdraw their own savings, only to find that the money is simply gone. Analysts believe this reflects deeper manipulation within the banking system, as the government struggles to manage a currency crisis, while continuing to fund its military and regional operations. The protests have not stayed confined to major cities like Tehran and Shiraz. Demonstrations have also spread into western provinces, including Kermanshah, Khuzestan, and Kurdistan, regions with their own histories of economic neglect. In each of these areas, the underlying grievance remains the same. People cannot afford medicine, food, or basic living costs, while the government continues to prioritize military spending and support for armed groups operating outside its borders. This is where the timing of the current conflict becomes especially significant. The economic collapse driving these protests did not begin with the war. It was already underway before the first strikes resumed. However, the wartime conditions have made it far easier for the government to avoid addressing these problems directly. Every resource, every dollar, and every unit of attention is now being redirected toward the military campaign and its allied forces in the region, rather than toward fixing the underlying economic disaster at home. For many protesters, this is the deepest source of frustration. They are not simply angry about a single price increase or a single missed paycheck. They are angry that a government facing military pressure from outside continues to spend money on weapons and proxy forces, while its own citizens struggle to survive. That contradiction, more than any single event, is what continues to pull new groups of people into the streets, even as the risks of doing so remain high. A tiny island shaped almost like a dolphin has suddenly become one of the most important locations on the map. Kish Island, known mainly as a tax-free holiday destination for Iranian tourists, is now under direct fire from American forces, a sign of just how far the current military campaign has expanded. The strikes on Kish are part of a much larger pattern. In recent nights, American forces have targeted multiple locations along Iran's southern coast, including the port city of Bandar Abbas, the region of Chabahar, and the nearby island of Keshem. Analysts note that many of these areas had already been hit in earlier rounds of the conflict, but the renewed strikes suggest Washington is focused on preventing any rebuilding of military infrastructure in the same locations. One of the more significant developments involves the return of a naval blockade around the Strait of Hormuz. According to an official announcement from the United States Navy, the blockade began enforcement at 8 o'clock in the evening, local time, and covers Iranian ports and oil export facilities. The order also restricts ship-to-ship transfers, and any vessel attempting to move cargo in violation of the rules risks being fired upon. The mechanics of this blockade reveal a specific problem that has appeared in earlier phases of the conflict as well. Ships heading toward Iranian ports are blocked from entering. However, ships attempting to leave those same ports are technically allowed to pass, but only if they can safely get past Iranian forces first. In practice, this creates a dangerous situation where departing vessels are sometimes fired upon by Iran's own Revolutionary Guard in an apparent effort to prevent shipments from being intercepted by American forces. Analysts point out that this pattern, while dangerous for sailors, has also helped American forces locate and target the specific positions from which Iranian forces are firing. Away from the coastline, a separate but connected development is unfolding. Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has continued launching anti-ship missiles from island positions in an attempt to strike American warships stationed nearby. However, this tactic carries serious risk for the Guard. Unlike underground missile storage sites, missiles fired from surface positions on open ground expose the launch teams to detection and retaliation almost immediately after firing. Meanwhile, a significant diplomatic shift has taken place outside the immediate battlefield. The United Kingdom has formally designated Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization. This decision followed sustained pressure, both from the Iranian opposition abroad and reportedly from the American government as well. Officials within the British government had reportedly hesitated for years, partly due to long-standing historical ties between the two countries dating back several decades, and partly out of concern over potential retaliation from Tehran. The designation is now seen as a signal that other Western governments may follow with similar measures. At the same time, a secondary front in the wider regional conflict has opened up. Yemen's Houthi movement, widely understood to operate as a proxy force aligned with Iran's Revolutionary Guard, launched a series of ballistic missiles toward Saudi Arabia. According to Saudi military officials, several of these missiles were intercepted near the cities of Abha and Jeddah. The Houthi movement, for its part, claims that its strikes successfully hit their intended targets. As with much of the information coming out of this conflict, both sides are making claims that cannot be independently verified, leaving outside observers with two competing versions of the same event. Adding to the uncertainty, President Trump addressed the situation directly during a live interview, warning that Iran's leadership should be prepared for continued and intensified strikes in the immediate future. His comments were interpreted by many analysts as confirmation that the current campaign is not a short, limited operation, but part of a sustained military effort expected to continue over multiple nights. Taken together, these developments show a conflict that is no longer confined to a single battlefield. It now stretches across Iranian coastal territory, contested shipping lanes in the Persian Gulf, diplomatic decisions in London, and a secondary front in Saudi Arabia involving Iranian-aligned forces. Each of these elements is connected to the same central conflict, but each also carries its own separate risks of further escalation, making the overall situation increasingly difficult to predict or contain. A peace agreement that was announced with great fanfare has already been dismissed by the very leader who signed it. President Trump, when asked directly about the Memorandum of Understanding reached earlier with regional mediators, described it simply as a test. In his words, the other side failed that test. This single comment has effectively closed the door on any near-term diplomatic resolution, and it confirms that the military campaign is expected to continue rather than wind down. This dismissal matters because it removes one of the few remaining paths toward de-escalation. A memorandum of understanding, by its nature, is not a binding agreement. It is a statement of intent, and intent alone has proven insufficient in this conflict. According to Trump, similar arrangements had been discussed and even agreed upon in the past, only to collapse before implementation. The pattern, according to his own account, has now repeated itself once again. On the military side, questions have emerged from the public about why American naval forces do not simply move closer to the Iranian coastline and directly target remaining positions with heavier firepower. The answer, according to military analysts, lies in the nature of the threat itself. Most fixed structures, permanent military installations, storage facilities, and known missile sites have already been destroyed in earlier rounds of strikes. What remains are mobile, hidden threats, fast boats, portable launchers, and small units that appear briefly, fire, and disappear before they can be targeted directly. This has been compared to a game of whack-a-mole. American forces wait for a threat to reveal itself, strike it quickly, and then wait again for the next one to appear. Moving naval vessels too close to the coastline would expose them to these hidden threats, without providing any meaningful strategic advantage, since there are no large, fixed targets left to justify the increased risk. At the same time, the naval blockade around the Strait of Hormuz has created an unintended byproduct. As Iranian forces fire upon departing vessels in an attempt to prevent shipments from slipping past the blockade, they inadvertently reveal their own firing positions. This has allowed American forces to identify and neutralize these positions more efficiently than would otherwise be possible, turning a defensive measure by Iran into a vulnerability that continues to be exploited. Beyond the battlefield, the domestic uprising inside Iran adds a second layer of pressure that cannot be resolved through military means alone. Historical patterns from Iran's own recent past suggest that protest movements driven primarily by economic desperation tend to ebb and flow rather than build in a single, uninterrupted wave. The uprising that began in December of last year followed a similar rhythm, intensifying for a period, then quieting, before returning again as conditions worsened further. Analysts suggest the current unrest may follow a comparable path, particularly as the ongoing military campaign diverts both attention and resources away from any government response to the underlying economic crisis. This creates a difficult balancing act for Iran's leadership. Security forces cannot fully commit to suppressing the protests, while simultaneously defending against an active military campaign. At the same time, the government cannot address the root economic causes of the unrest, since nearly every available resource is being directed toward the war effort and its allied forces in the region. As a result, Both crises are likely to continue in parallel, each reinforcing the pressure created by the other. Internationally, the picture is equally complex. The United Kingdom's decision to designate the Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organization may encourage similar action from other Western governments, further isolating Iran diplomatically. Meanwhile, the unresolved and unverified claims coming from both Saudi Arabia and Yemen's Houthi movement illustrate how difficult it has become to separate confirmed fact from wartime propaganda across the wider region. Looking ahead, there's no clear indication that either front, military or civil, is close to resolution. The military campaign appears set to continue at its current pace or intensify further, based on statements from American officials. The protest movement inside Iran shows no sign of losing momentum, even as the risks facing demonstrators continue to grow. For now, both crises remain unresolved, developing in parallel, with neither side showing any indication of stepping back.